Hey guys, welcome to an interesting video on Wild Rift. So today we're back with the tier list for patch 6.1, and since the last tier list video, of course we have a lot of champion buffs and nerfs. We also have the addition, of course, of Malignance, Ban on Fantasy. We also have the change to the Ionian Boots of Lucidity, which now gives you mana regen, which is huge for the support role and enchanters. So the biggest changes are going to be in the mid lane as well as the support roles. But we also have the addition of Ryze as a new champion. So without further ado, let's jump into the discussion for the Baron lane. Now, honestly, in the Baron lane, not too much has really changed. I've only really made a couple of changes, a lot of reordering in terms of champions here and there. Some champions moving up and down as usual, but we're going to cover the major changes. So the first major change is, of course, the addition of Ryze. You can see I put Ryze at the bottom of the S plus tier. And the reason is, I think Ryze is incredibly strong now. His damage is really good. In lane, his damage is honestly decent considering he's a scaling champion. Obviously, when you hit, your 2-3 item spikes, when you start getting all of that mana and getting your death cap, you start doing insane amounts of damage. You also have point and click CC, just really high numbers right now. I mean, Ryze is really just a numbers kind of champion. So if his numbers are good, he is going to be strong. And I think in the Baron lane, he is pretty decent in the sense that in general the Baron lane champions do not have a lot of threat on him. Like if you play conservatively, you will not really get killed all that easily, and especially if you're a phase rush and things like that, not that easy to kill. So you can kind of just scale into the game with that. The rest of the S plus tier still kind of remains the same. I still think Jax, Gnar, Wukong, and Ornn are all incredibly strong. Most of the S tier remains the same as well, but I have two new additions into the S tier, and that's Teemo as well as Tryndamere. So Teemo, the really big change this patch is the addition of Malignance. Malignance is an amazing Teemo item, and most Teemos will probably go Malignance first or second item, the other core Teemo item being Liandry's Torment, so probably Liandry's into Malignance, and the insane thing about Malignance, of course, is it gives you lower alt CD, so you can spam your mushrooms even more. And when your mushrooms proc, it already causes like an explosion and a damage over time, but that's gonna stack together with the Malignance damage over time as well, which is also going to stack with Liandry's. So you step on one mushroom, you think like, oh, it's not that bad, and then you just start losing your health rapidly. Like a squishy stepping on a mushroom can lose them a quarter to a third of their health, and they step on a couple of mushrooms and it's just all over. And if you play Teemo in the correct way, which is around objectives, you want to be setting up your shrooms before objectives actually spawn, and then when the enemies walk in, they just step all over all of the shrooms, and then they're going to be in trouble. Now, this can easily be countered by using Sweeper. However, we all know in solo queue, no one really takes the Sweeper, and they're all just going to step on the shrooms, and they're going to get destroyed. So Teemo is actually in a really good spot right now because of that. And Tryndamere is in a good spot for a different reason. Tryndamere himself got directly buffed. I think it was this latest patch or one patch ago. And the buff to his like Q is actually really insane, and he has kind of come back in. And especially because a lot of people are not used to playing against Tryndamere at the moment, because Tryndamere is, I mean, he's been in the game since the game released, right? But not many people play Tryndamere. So many people are dying to Tryndamere level 5 by getting dived under tower and things like that. And Tryndamere is just getting giga fed. Like as an ADC, there's not a lot I can do when my top laner goes 0 and 3 and Tryndamere gets 3 kills, snowballs, takes the tower, and then basically can ult and run anybody down using Ghost and just take towers and split push and become unstoppable. At it when that happens, right? So I feel that at the current moment Tryndamere is really strong, but when people start realizing how to deal with Tryndamere a little bit more, I think he is gonna drop in terms of power level. But the rest of the top lane remains relatively similar, so we're gonna move on to talking about the jungle. So in the jungle, also a number of changes, but the top tier remains the same. I still think, Amumu and the rest of them like Hecarim, Vi, Lee, and Ambessa are still in a really strong spot. And most of the S tier also remains the same, with the notable addition of Graves. Now, I think Graves is actually a really strong champion right now after he's gotten multiple rounds of buffs, with now having more grit, more damage on his Q, etc. I think Graves is actually in a really solid spot now. The main issue with Graves is that if you notice, all of the top tier junglers all have some kind of hard CC. And even a lot of the S tier junglers also have hard CC. And the reason why hard CC is great for junglers is because when they gank, CC is really important to getting off a successful gank. So Graves' main weakness is that although he scales really well and he does a lot of damage, he has no CC. Like his only CC is like a slow on his W, and most people don't even know that because it's so minuscule of a slow that it's not even obvious. So the main issue with Graves is you need to have laners who have CC. So for example, you want to have things like Galio in the mid lane or Lissandra in the mid lane, or you want to have like an engaged support or a top laner with CC. I've seen so many people pick Graves into teams that have little or no CC, and that is really not good. So for example, if you have a Victor in the mid lane, you have a Soraka support, and your top laner is like a Gnar who's like conditional CC on his ultimate, and then you pick Graves, this is not going to be good because your ganks are not really going to be successful and your team fights are going to be lacking CC. So Graves, I think, is really good situationally when your team has enough CC and you can afford to pick a carry pick in the jungle. So aside from that, not too many changes to the jungle tier list overall. Like just taking a glance at it, I have moved a couple of people up and down, for sure. Like I moved Gragas and Olaf down a little bit because I haven't seen them really make that much impact even when they're fit in the jungle for the most part, and not too many other changes in the jungle. So we're gonna talk about the real big changes in the mid lane now. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, is the mid lane and the support role that has had the biggest changes. So of course, Ryze I think is the best mid laner right now, and he's basically perma-banned in solo queue just because his numbers are so high. And as I mentioned, the top lane, he does insane amounts of damage, AoE damage as well, and is just a very strong champion at the moment. I mean, you guys know how the release champions are like. They're either really weak or really strong, and in this case, he is really strong. And of course, as I mentioned, the big change is the addition of Malignance and Bandle Fantasy. So, how has this really changed things? Well, Bandle Fantasy is really just a slightly different version of Ludens. It's not a very big deal. So, some people who used to go Ludens can now go Bandle Fantasy. So, champions like Ziggs, like Syndra, definitely can benefit from Bandle Fantasy simply because it's a little bit better for them, I guess, because it does do a little bit more damage in the grand scheme of things if you are able to hit it. So that is kind of useful. Right? The bigger change is Malignance. So Malignance has made a lot of champions stronger, and as a result, they have overtaken a lot of champions. So the first example of that is Kassadin, right? So Kassadin, he doesn't really need the alt CD because it's a really low alt cooldown. But the fact that he ults constantly and he's able to proc Malignance constantly is very useful. And also he makes good use of the mana on Malignance, which not a lot of champions do, right? So like he's one of the examples of a champion that Malignance made a lot better, and he goes back up into the S plus tier. So if you take a look at the S tier, you will see that notably a lot of the AD champions have dropped tremendously. So Zed is no longer in the S tier. Yasuo and Yone maybe at the bottom of S tier, could maybe be A plus tier as well. Probably the best S tier champion right now is Corki, because Corki of course just got his rework last patch, so he's almost like a brand new champion in a way, and he still has really high numbers, so he is still really strong. And you can see champions like Ahri and Katarina are also really good Malignance users. Because Katarina can hit multi-target with Malignance and get resets. Of course, not like a rush item, for example, on her, but it's one of her, could go for it as one of her later items. And Ahri has 3 charges of her ult, and she can get even more when she resets. So Ahri has always been a great, Malignance champion. And very notably, someone who moves up a ton is actually Annie. So Annie is also really good in Malignance because normally you are gonna stun on your ulti, and that's gonna deal huge AoE damage and proc Malignance, for example. So Annie with a Malignance rush is actually really strong right now. Of course, Annie did get that mini rework at some point in time where she got the extra knock on her ulti. So normally you ult burst someone down and then CC whoever's trying to run away or run after you, and then you wait for rotations again. So she's in a really decent spot at the moment. And I've also moved up Veigar and Seraphine. I actually think Veigar, after he got his round of buffs, is actually pretty decent now. It scales a lot faster and does quite a decent amount of damage. And some Veigar's even built Malignance. Now, I'm not really sure if this is optimal, but you do get the extra CD on the alt cooldown, so I guess you could ult more often. But with that logic, Malignance could be built on a lot of champions like Orianna and Syndra as well, but you don't really build that because it's not really that good. So I think Veigar is just better because of the buffs and the stacking. And Seraphine is actually a lot better now because of the Ionian Boots of Lucidity and her being able to get the mana regen from it and spam spells. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we reach the support role. And as a result, I've kind of adjusted a lot of the champions down to B tier, like Gragas, Akshan, Swain, TF, and Fizz, who I don't really think are picked a lot or making a very big impact at the moment. And with that, let's move on to my favorite role, ADC. So of course, ADC is my favorite role to talk about, and honestly, not too many changes, but we do have a couple of minor changes. So first off, I still think Varus and Sivir are the best champions to play right now. Varus, of course, with his incredible build diversity, being able to basically build anything under the sun, even tank if you really wanted to. And Sivir just doing insane amounts of damage, being able to bounce off of all the frontline champions who are still very popular in the meta. So Corki, I move him down to S tier, the top of S tier, because I don't think Corki is as good as Sivir and Varus, to be very honest. But I still think he's incredibly strong. Now, somebody I've moved up is actually MF. Now, I actually think MF has been underrated a lot by me, especially. I guess I don't know about other people, but the more I play MF and the more I play against MF, the better and better I think she is. And that's simply due to the fact that in lane, she does a lot of damage. In the later stages of the game, she also does a lot of damage. And she's basically just a pure damage champion, right? She offers nothing else to the team other than damage. But even in games where I'm behind or I'm not like obscenely far ahead, I still do a lot of damage. And I think that like kind of the telltale sign for these kind of champions that have zero utility and is full damage, champions like MF, champions like Jinx, these kind of champions that have no utility at all and it's just damage, right? It just depends on how much damage you can do. So if the damage is good like MF, then she's gonna be strong. But if it's not that good like Jinx, then it's not gonna be that good. And a champion I've moved down is actually Kai'Sa. Now, for the longest time, I've always thought Kai'Sa was like really strong. I had her in the S plus tier for very long. Last patch, I moved her down to the S tier, still thinking she's really strong. But then I moved her down to the A plus tier, and that's because I've been playing a lot of Kai'Sa personally on hit, AP, a lot of variations of builds as well. And I really don't feel Kai'Sa really making that big of an impact anymore. And she hasn't been personally buffed or nerfed for a very long time. And I really think it's just because a lot of champions just gotten better and the meta has just evolved that even though she hasn't personally been touched, she's just not as good in the current state of the game. But of course, when I say not that good, I just mean not as good as what she once originally was. You can see that she is still ranking pretty high on the tier list in the A plus tier, and pretty much according to my tier list, at least she's like the 7th best ADC in the meta, which is really not too bad of a spot at all. Zeri also in a very similar spot to Kai'Sa. They actually play very, very similar roles. Both are kind of hyper carries, but Kai'Sa a little bit more of an assassin compared to Zeri a little bit more backline. And Ashe also has really nice, decent spots. We will be having an Ashe video on the channel probably tomorrow or the day after as well, updated for the latest patch. And yeah, so taking a look at the rest of the ADC tier list, I've decided to actually move Samira as well as Kalista and Nyla up by one tier, simply because I do think that there are spots where these champions are good. So I feel that Samira and Kalista are now in a very similar spot to Nyla. And actually, honestly, all the champions in the B tier are all kind of in a similar spot except for Draven, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean that I feel that these are very, very specific counter picks that basically are not really very good blind picks, except maybe Caitlyn. Caitlyn's an okay blind pick, right? Like Vayne counters the tanks. Kalista works very well with like teams who kind of want to engage, and Samira as well. So Kalista and Samira have a very similar kind of niche, right? Where they're kind of like all-in champions that want to work with teams that want to go all in. And then Neela, of course, works very well against teams with multiple auto attackers. And with Tryndamere now on the rise, of course, could be possible that we have more Neela spots. And I feel that personally, I don't think Caitlyn really is that good of an ADC. I don't think she really does enough damage. So I think that she's a very good counter pick when you're against like low range champions, right? So champions like a lot of these, like against the Kalista, the Samira, the Vaynes, the Dravens actually also. I think she's just a really good pick against a lot of these champions to kind of neutralize the lane. Even maybe Sivir is a pretty good pick for Caitlyn as well. And Draven, I feel like Draven is not inherently weak, but the reason why I rank Draven really low is just because the playstyle of Draven and the risk and reward is kind of not really worth it when there's so many better champions, right? Like, for example, Draven has a very, very strong early game, and you want to cash in and snowball off of that and kind of bring that lead into the mid and late game. But why would you want to risk getting behind in the early game and then basically becoming useless when you can play a champion who's basically almost equally as strong, which is like Varus, right? Varus is insanely strong in the early game, even after him being the top ADC for like almost a year now. Many people still underestimate his damage, and it's still so easy to get kills in lane. And everybody respects Draven, and people are not gonna let Draven get kills in lane very easily. So why take that risk, right? And of course, Twitch is still the worst ADC. Like, there's no real reason to play Twitch. You want invisibility. You have Vayne and Kai'Sa. If you want damage over time, that's not really an ADC thing, right? You want to be in a long range hyper carry. You have Jinx, you have Kai'Sa, you have Zeri. So I feel like Twitch doesn't really fill any niche right now, and he's just not very strong numbers wise, right? Because he's another pure damage champion, right? So his numbers needs to get buffed for him to actually be good. And with all that said, let's move on to the supports. Okay, so for the supports, we now have the return of the enchanters, and engagers are kind of falling back down the tier list. Why is that the case? Well, it's literally because of the change to the Ionian Boots of Lucidity. Now, previously, supports had to choose between going for Ionian Boots for the cooldown, or they had to choose between going Mana Boots for mainly the Mana regen. I mean, AP is nice and Magic Pen is nice, but they're mainly taking it for the Mana regen. Now that Ionian Boots have Mana regen, pretty much every enchanter support should be going for Ionian Boots, except for maybe those mage style like Lux, for example, probably shouldn't be going for that. But pretty much everyone else, like the Yumis and the Lulus of the world, will all be going for Ionian Boots. And with more CDR, it's only going to make enchanters better because it just means they can spam spells more often. And this has basically led to a uptick in terms of enchanters being picked and banned as well. But also it means that enchanters are way stronger. So obviously the general best enchanters are always going to be like Yumi, Lulu, and to some extent Milio. Now the main thing pulling Yumi down is that it's solo queue, right? So Yumi is completely reliant on a teammate. So if you have at least one fat person, and then you're gonna be golden. You will see this in a video that I'm making soon on Zeri Yumi. And Lulu is a little bit better because she's a little bit more independent in the sense that if someone jumps her, she can ult, she can polymorph, and she can of course just buff people very well as well, which is why I rank Lulu over Yumi for the purposes of solo queue. Now Lux is a really good mix between an enchanter and damage. Now I just think Lux's damage is way too high, right, for the amount of utility she has as well. Because Lux, even when she builds like full support, she still does a lot of decent damage considering she builds items like Ardent Sensor, Staff of Flowing Water that give AP, right? So if she builds full damage, she one-shots people. If she builds full support, she buffs people out real well, and she can do really good amount of poke damage and really good amount of damage to just champions in general, right? So the counter to enchanters are hook supports, right? So I think the best ones at the moment are Pyke and Blitzcrank. And why is it the case? Well, because basically their pulls, unlike Leona and Nautilus, like with Leona and Nautilus, they are still great engage supports. But when they engage on enchanters, Leona flies all the way to where the enchanter is. Nautilus meets them halfway. But Blitzcrank pulls them all the way to where he is, and Pyke pulls them halfway towards where he is without him having to move. So the main reason why Pyke and Nautilus are just better right now is because they have more non-committal engage, right? What I mean by that is when when you miss your hook and stuff, it's not really that bad. But or not rather when you miss your hook, when you hit your hook, you can take advantage of it a lot more easily. Whereas with Nautilus and Leona, when you hit the CC, they can take advantage of you if your ADC is not in position. Like for example, if you're Leona, you E in on an enchanter, right? Let's say you E in on Soraka. Right, your ADC is out of position. You're gonna get silenced by Soraka. You can't flash out. You're gonna take a bunch of damage, maybe even die, and that's kind of just the main reason why they're worse. Right, so after the enchanter counters of Pyke and Blitzcrank, we have the rest of the enchanters. Right, we have Milio, who's amazing. Soraka's amazing as well. Seraphine moves way on up in the tier list because again now with Lucidity boots and with all the support items, yep, she's just really good. When you max W and spam your double shields, the shielding is just so insane. It's like even better version of Lux. And Zyra have actually moved up all the way into S tier. Now I've been playing against a lot of Zyra recently, and Zyra, as we know, got nerfed to the ground, and she's just gone 2 rounds of buffs. Now it's come to a point where Zyra's poke is really potent, in the sense that she launches her W and not W, she launches her Q and her E. It doesn't even have to hit you, but the plants it spawns and the poke the plants do is really decent, and it's just very annoying to play against. And it's just she's just a champion that she has that CC on the E. She has a lot of damage, so sometimes even when you're under tower, if you're alone under tower, you can easily get comboed by her and the ADC, and you just die under tower. It happened to me a number of times, so I actually think Zyra is in a really solid spot right now. So in the A plus tier, I've actually moved Senna down because I think like Senna's like kind of like a mix between an enchanter and not really an engager, but like between damage and enchanting, right? So I feel at the moment, those specialized enchanters and specialized engagers are just in a way better spot right now. So Senna's not as good as them. And then I also have a lot of like kind of tier 2 enchanter supports like Nami, Janna, and Sona. I think Sona is definitely on the rise right now with the changes. However, the main issue I have with Sona is her early game is really not too hot, and she's really no mobility, and Sona players are just not very good from what I've seen so far. Like they're always out of position and they die too easily. But honestly, Sona is kind of that champion that late game she's so strong that you just need to mash your buttons and you're pretty much gonna be good. But that's pretty much it for the tier list. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for the videos on Ashe and Zeri coming out in the next couple of days. Thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.